investigative journalist named Jeffrey Klein. He's one of the co-founders of Mother Jones, and he's now working on assignment for investigative fund of the Nation Institute. And I'll tell you what, he takes it to McCain right at the center of his perceived strength, which is his military record. He said, first of all, John Lehman, who now is an advisor to the McCain campaign, who back in 1981 was the Secretary of the Navy, he's actually a 9/11 commissioner as well, apparently told folks, and the New York Times wrote a story recently saying about how Lehman offered up the position of admiral to John McCain back then, and McCain heroically thought about it and thought, no, I can be of better service to my country as a politician. And he said, I'm going to go and try to run for the House, and I'm going to give up what I've always dreamed of, which is to be an admiral. Now, there's a huge problem in this story, and the New York Times ran it apparently without noticing any of the problems in the story. One is that in his own memoir, John McCain pretty much says that he didn't think he had a chance at being admiral, and that was part of the reason that he decided to leave the Navy and actually go into politics instead. His dad was an admiral, his grandfather was an admiral, and he'd always dreamed of being an admiral, but it didn't look like he was going to get it, so he decided to pursue another path. So those two stories flat out don't match, and it's a little embarrassing the New York Times didn't even bother to check John McCain's memoir on what they said. John Lehman works for McCain's campaign now, so just take his word on it is not the best course of action, probably. But here's the second problem. Apparently at that point, John McCain had been promoted to captain about 1.5 to 2 years before that. And normally it takes at least 5 or 6 years to get promoted from captain to admiral. Jeffrey Klein, the journalist in this case, went and talked to several other admirals who became admirals in that time period. And they said, from captain to admiral in 2 years? And the Secretary of the Navy was going to offer him this position? They're like, first of all, that's not what the Secretary of the Navy does. He's eventually on part of the panels that approves it or doesn't approve it, but he's not the one that nominates people for admirals. And to do it in 2 years from captain? Unprecedented and really unthinkable. If you know anything about the Navy, that's not how it works at all. Inconceivable. Didn't happen. Very clear on the record, 2 other Navy admirals saying that. Okay? So it looks like part of John McCain's camp here has told a fib. So now he opens up the door, and Jeffrey Klein goes in further and says, hey, you know what, let's look at his service in the military a little closer, because I know that's a topic that's verboten. You're not supposed to talk about it. John McCain's a war hero. Shush, 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 don't challenge anything. But when you look at what he did, it's like, you know what? One, how did he get to be the position that he got in the first place? How did he get to be a pilot when he finished in the bottom 5 of his class at the Naval Academy? Bottom 5. Out of 889, I believe he was 884 of his graduating class. Now you think, hey, you know what, that happens, but maybe you're really great anyway, and that's just how you did in school. But you see, how you get to fly the planes that you do in combat has a lot to do with how you did in the Naval Academy. They don't just pick people out at random and be like, let's take number 371, number 13, number 481, and oh yeah, that guy down there at 884. No, it takes a long time to qualify. You have to jump through a lot of hoops, and one of them is performing well in school and not performing at the bottom 5 of your graduating class. So Klein brings up an obvious point, which is, could John McCain have gotten that position because his dad was an admiral and his grandfather was an admiral and he didn't really earn it? And when you look at it and the way he presents it, and there's a long story about it on Huffington Post, the answer becomes a little obvious. Yeah, of course he got it because of his dad and his grandfather, and he got promoted up. And then you get to the uncomfortable comparison. Who does that remind you of? Obviously, George W. Bush jumps to mind, using his parents' connections to get to places he shouldn't be. But you know what? If John McCain's a great pilot, then all this is irrelevant, and who cares how he got there? At least he performed admirably. Except, not that he didn't perform admirably. Of course he did. And when he was a prisoner of war, he stayed with his guys there. And a lot of people took the North Vietnamese offers, and they left early when they weren't supposed to, according to military protocol. And John McCain was not one of those people. Okay, so you have to give him a world of credit for that. Now, having said that, he crashed 5 planes. I mean, it's not like he was a legendary pilot, the Red Baron, that shot down all these other folks and never crashed. He crashed 5 different planes. Oftentimes, one time he crashed a plane going to the Army-Navy game in Philadelphia. Another time he came back from the war and he wouldn't have been allowed to fly normally because remember he had his arms broken from the crash and then once re-broken by the Vietnamese. And it's not his fault, but he just wasn't in the physical shape to fly again. And according to Navy protocol, he wasn't supposed to. But because of and partly because of what he went through, they allowed him to fly again. And he crashed another plane. And I'm not blaming him for the 5th crash, but the first 4 crashes, and I don't know, I'm not there, I didn't fight in Vietnam, and I'm in no position to tell you when it makes sense that you crash the plane, and it would make sense when you don't crash the plane. But when you open the door and you look at how did he get to the positions that he got to, and you see that it probably was because of his family rather than what he earned, and then in fact he'd been brash all along, didn't follow orders, which in the military, by the way, is a significant problem, especially when you're in the middle of a war. That image as this war hero begins to get tarnished a little bit. Now, I wouldn't make a decision based on that, on who should be president anyway, right? I wouldn't. And I'd look to see what his policy positions are. But John McCain opened the door to these questions with this needless lie about how he was going to get promoted to admiral, but he turned it down because he wanted to serve his country as, someone in the House of Representatives, and then eventually, of course, became a senator. He shouldn't have done that.